Telecana.
In it. Back to the river.
The two men race 4 miles back to the Pecos River. But the Comanche are even better riders than Loving and Wilson.
The Comanche, being small of stature, were perfect jockeys, and it was said they could ride before they could walk. And they were doing all of this without the kind of tack we have today. Under these conditions, they'd ride at fullest gallop and hang over the side of the horse and fire arrows under the horse's neck.
The Comanche are catching up. But Loving and Wilson make it to the river. Now, they have to find cover. The Comanche know this territory. Loving and Wilson have to outsmart them.
So what they have to do is they have to back themselves into a corner to where everyone has to approach them. Literally, the military calls it avenue of approach. We've made it so that the Indians are going to have to make a lot of noise or disrupt a lot of ground to get at us.
The myth is that cowboys have guns and American Indians have arrows. The reality is by 1867, Indians are using more than just bows and arrows. But their guns are not up to the same standard as Oliver Loving's.
Many of the Indian tribes had begun to arm themselves pretty heavily with different types of weapons. Many of them were muzzle-loading single-shot rifles like this one. Keep that in mind, single shot. You fire it once, you have to reload it.
Loving has a Henry repeating rifle. It was invented 6 years before this shootout and commands the latest technology.
At the time that Loving and Wilson are pinned down by the Indians, we know that weapons like this and bows and arrows are being used against them. But this technological marvel from the Civil War, the Henry rifle, is going to more than even the odds. This weapon has several advantages. First of all, we have multiple rounds. You fire once, you cock it and fire again. You don't have to reload it for 16 shots. One shot, 16, very simple. More importantly, it's quick to load. You simply open up the magazine and you drop in the cartridges. 16 shots in quick succession is going to be a technological marvel compared to the single shot rifles of the Indians. Much more effective.
As time drags on, neither side is winning. The Comanche know they're outgunned and devise a cunning plan. They reach out in the prevailing trading language of the plains, Spanish, and offer to talk with the cowboys. But it's a trick. Since Wilson speaks some Spanish, Loving asks him to respond. Wilson doesn't trust the Comanche.
Fellas are pretty snaky.
But Loving insists.
All right, but you cover me with that big Henry rifle.
Loving stands to cover Wilson. Both sides know once a man is hit, his chances of survival in an environment like this are grim.
Mr. Loving, are you hit?
The shot penetrates Loving's left hand, shattering his wrist, and then slicing into his right side. Some say Loving was hit with an arrow. Others say it was a bullet. The truth reveals the limits of weapons of the time.
We're going to use this ham in a little experiment to test the penetration of both period black powder muzzle-loading firearms and arrows. You can notice it has a metal tip on it, and this is indicative of arrows that we find in the Southwest at the turn of the mid part of the 19th century. The question is, does this arrow have enough kinetic energy to pass through the wrist and then lodge into the right side of a human body? What we see here is the arrow, in fact, did penetrate all the way through the bone, but it didn't penetrate all the way through the skin. Although this may be a little more dense than the human wrist, it's not much so. The chances that an arrow could have gone through the wrist and then penetrated the side doesn't look likely. Now we need to try it with a period muzzle loader to see if we get a deeper penetration. Now we've hit this with the bullet, and although we've hit it in a slightly thicker spot, you can see we have a clear entrance wound. The bullet did penetrate all the way through. It came out cleanly here, and then it penetrated deeply into this 4x4 that was our backing. Certainly, there's enough penetration here to have cleared both sides of a human wrist and still come across and done some damage to the right side of Loving. It is likely that in fact we don't have here an injury caused by an arrow, but in fact by some type of black powder weapon.
For Oliver Loving, it's a dire situation. He can't shoot his rifle and can only barely shoot his revolver. Wilson tries to cover them both. But with only one arm, he too is at a grave disadvantage. Meanwhile, Goodnight and his cowboys push their herd toward Fort Sumner. Goodnight knows Loving is a daring man. He worries the two cowboys don't stand a chance if caught by Indians. Charles Goodnight has no idea his friend's life hangs in the balance. The day after the attack, Loving is weaker and suffering from a high fever. He fears the wound in his side is causing him to bleed to death. He doesn't realize the wrist wound is much worse.
You're gonna have to go get somebody.
He begs Wilson to get word to Goodnight.
I think it's my only chance.
Wilson is hesitant to leave him, but finally agrees.
Mr. Loving, you take my pistols. Don't you worry, I'll be right back.
All right.
Wilson knows Goodnight has placed his faith in him, and he doesn't want to let either of his bosses down. Wilson slips into the river to escape and try to find Goodnight. But Goodnight is even farther away than either man realizes. He'd rested the cattle for a day and a half, so now he's a full 80 miles behind them. For Wilson, it's a race against time.
Tomorrow on American Pickers.
I think we died and went to heaven.
The guys go swamp picking and find a Louisiana classic.
Simplex was a company in New Orleans that made bikes starting in 1935. They were the only bike ever made in the southern states. When we see them in a Louisiana swamp, we gotta bring those things back home.
Or will he leave empty-handed?
I'll pay you $300 for it.
Just two guys rescuing American history, one piece at a time. American Pickers. Tomorrow at 9 on History. Made every day.
Nissan's National TED event is going on now. We've made them capable and award-winning. We've made them dependable and inspiring. Now, we've made them easier to get, like Nissan Altima, $199 per month, or 0% financing on most new Nissans. Get to a Nissan dealer today. Hurry, Nissan's National TED event ends soon.
How do you spot the guys who always do a super job? Just